one of the cardinal sins that most salespeople have is they think about what they need from the conversation versus what the person that you're talking to needs from that conversation.
So ultimately, for me as an executive and a business leader, it's all about my time and making the most effective use of that time. And so, as I need to reach out to partners, I want to make sure that the conversations that I do have really are about value.
Welcome to the Go to Market Lab. This is a podcast where we focus on sharing our wealth of information around the subject of go to market, specifically for founders who are at early stage companies through even $100 million of run rate. Founders are going through the different pivots and stages of their business growth journey. This is a podcast to help you with those pivots and build all that knowledge within a community. So, without further ado, I want to get into today's episode. I, in a former life, was being onboarded into a large tech company and I was a first line sales manager. So I was new to the company. As a part of that process, that company's CIO came in to speak to the sales team about how they like to be sold to. He told all kinds of stories around this is what this sales rep did in this situation. And man, I saw through it. The example that he gave was, every sales rep likes to have ROIs. And they said, yeah, we worked with so and so Acme company, and this is the outcome we have. And he's like, man, I know that dude at so and so Acme company. So he calls his buddy up, and it doesn't actually line up to their story that he has. So he shared a bunch of different little gotchas like that. And man, I was cringing because I was thinking, I've probably done half of what he's complaining about. And man, I really wish that when I was a 26-year-old sales rep for the first time, I could have heard this. My whole team can hear this as I'm bringing them up to speed as well and enabling them. So through that, I thought would be a really good thing. And go to market, we've had guests on that are on the go to market and sales side, specifically in their roles. But I think it'd be helpful for those who are listening who are in the cybersecurity world. This is really your chance to understand what is running through the mindset and the heads of who you're selling to, with somebody who I have all kinds of respect for because of the fact that he is a thought leader in the cybersecurity industry and how he really thinks through problems. He's been not only a great friend and customer of mine in the past, but he's also a great thought partner in terms of really looking at what is next in terms of the security landscape and how he leads his organization. So, with all further ado, let me introduce Mr. Scott Moser. So, Scott is currently the Chief Information Security Officer of an organization called Sabre. It's a Fortune 1000 tech company, and a lot of people don't know the Sabre name, but you do know them because they are fundamentally run the backbone of the travel industry. Prior to that, Scott was the CISO of Caesars Entertainment. Yes, that Caesars, the Caesars that's in Vegas and a bunch of different places. So if you're listening now and you don't know Scott, you're probably thinking, Scott seems like quite the risk taker there. So he's in high tech and he's been in the gambling industry. But I would say that he is also the master of calculated, well thought out risk, specifically because of his military background. So he actually formed all of his knowledge through 25 years in the Air Force, working up from a staff IT analyst all the way to the CIO of a large major military unit. And along the way there, let me count them, Scott. You got 3 degrees?
It's actually five, Kathleen, but no, we're not really counting.
I am counting because it's quite impressive. So through all that learning and moving up, well versed in all things technology from a deep technology front, but you'll see through the course of this conversation, he's also a fantastic leader from a security perspective. He has a team who will follow him through the coals and back. So without that being said, Scott, thank you for being a guest on the show today.
It's my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to getting an opportunity to talk with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about first concepts of just from your seat. So view from the buyer's perspective. So, and we'll just give, obviously from your role from a CISO's view, as you need to engage vendors, specifically maybe software vendors or security vendors, Scott, what do you feel like are the top struggles that you have whenever you need to go through that process? You identify a need your organization, you know you're going to need to purchase a software tool or something to address that. What do you feel like is the most challenging in that?
Ultimately, for me as an executive and a business leader, it's all about my time and making the most effective use of that time. And so, as I need to reach out to partners, I want to make sure that I'm very effective and time efficient. And the
Mhm.
conversations that I do have really are about value. Um, I know a lot of sales executive team members love to talk to the CISO or to the CIO right away because they know that that's ultimately probably the decision maker.
Yeah.
But honestly, that can be a very hard initial conversation to, get on someone's calendar. And it's because our time is very valuable and we primarily want to be leaders of our organization. We want to be good business partners internally as well as our customers. And so the time slice that can be given to the people we choose to partner with is incredibly small and it has to be very selective and it has to create value. I ask myself things like, do I know one of my fellow CISOs or other IT executives that has worked with this company before? Did I get a recommendation? Did I get an introduction? Or was this strictly a cold call that somehow reached to me? Those are all very important considerations when I think about that initial engagement with vendors.
That makes a lot of sense. And, keying off of that, Scott, I have a lot of respect for anybody serving the role of CISO because although there's other executive roles, you have such a complex landscape with a plethora of tools. Some are niche, some are platform,
Mhm.
but there's a lot to worry about. And so just thinking through, I'm sure every CISO wants unlimited budget. No CISO has that. So as you think about when you're working with vendors and how you're prioritizing, take us through how you think about that thought process of what starts to go up the stack in the pecking order versus lower.
Ultimately, my primary goal is to manage risk for our company. It's not primarily financial risk or, risk around customer loss, but it is significantly about creating trust with my customers that they choose to want to do business with my company because they know we're able and interested in protecting their information and their customer information as well. So, managing that risk is truly my top priority. And I think about what tools, technologies, and business partners do I need to help me accomplish that. It's a very complicated puzzle of both using internal resources that I have, whether those be people or maybe my own tools that we developed, along with fitting in the right external technologies or business services to make the best value for the business. There's a significant investment that we make both in buying software technology as well as paying for business partners to help us operate or build or even conduct audits on that technology. And so that cost versus value is extremely important to me because I want to maximize the profit for my company. Being able to make that decision is very helpful. And it's really understanding the total cost of ownership. It's not just that initial purchase, but well, how many people is it going to take me to operate this software tool that I bought from a partner? How much is the maintenance going to cost? How long is it going to take me to implement? All those are very important considerations.
Okay, so rank of 1 to 10, just of all the vendors you ever talked to, how does the universe of security vendors rank in their ability to demonstrate to you that total TCO as they're going through the sales process? Is that a pretty rarity, or would you say most people do it okay?
There are a few of my business partners, and honestly, there are people that have been in business for quite a while, and you can tell that they have invested themselves in the creation of metrics and reporting and dashboards and key performance indicators that they can deliver to me. And it's not just it's pre-sale to show well how they have created value for others, but it's also post-sale. That first 90 days after we've implemented a tool, if they can walk in my door and say, here's what you got out of your purchase in the first 90 days. That's incredibly valuable to me. So it's really about data that's able to be produced. And that's not just software technology, but what about if it's a professional services partner that's delivered? Incredibly important.
Yeah, yeah, makes perfect sense. I know we'll double click on that here in a little bit. So I'm sure you have a list on pet peeves, but I'd love to hear some fun stories and to demonstrate some of what you feel like are the most common mistakes that vendors make when they engage you or your team.
To me, the first thing is I judge a new partner by credibility of what they say. If I've had so many people come in and they're just trying to get my attention and they'll make very large claims for me and for many of my partners, We can see through a lot of the smoke and mirrors because we know what's real and not. I give great respect to account team members or their technical team supporters who've been practitioners in the past, who've actually walked in my shoes and understand what I need. So that credibility of the initial claim is incredibly important. The vendors that have lost my interest immediately will come and say, "Oh, we'll have this implemented in 2 weeks, no problem," because
Right?
I know
Never.
that's just never ever happen in my life. So don't even start with something that's not reasonable.
Yeah, that's a good one. Anything else?
Yeah, sure. The other thing is really just understanding my budget cycle. Like probably every other leader in a company, plans annual budgets. And just assuming that I have a couple $1,000,000 sitting around in the middle of the year that hasn't already been planned for something else is not a reasonable assumption. It's
Right.
a trade-off. And maybe I will make that trade-off. But if I'm going to be spending money with a service or product that was not planned 6 or 12 months ago, I'm not gonna do something else. I just don't have a pot of unassigned money that's in my budget. Maybe some companies do, but not me. So it's really about understanding, how do I plan? How long does it take? Do I have to make a trade-off? Am I giving up something else, or am I truly being able to plan for this properly?
So that's actually an interesting comment, Scott, because as a former sales rep myself, a former sales rep leader, it's typically our mentality is we don't want to come in necessarily and ask the budget cycle question too early because we
Mhm.
don't want to kind of look like, hey, I'm only here to talk to you whenever you have money. And so, are you kind of alluding to the fact that maybe you should kind of upfront say, "Hey, Scott, it seems like you have an interest in this product, but I don't want to pester you from a timing perspective. Realistically, you know, what does this look like in terms of when you would be seriously engaged?" Is that a fair question then to ask in an earlier state?
I think I would start with doing a little homework. The homework being, if it's a public company, you can look at their 10K when they file annual. That tells you that's the end of their fiscal year. And they have probably started planning for a fiscal year 4 to 6 months before that year ever begins. So that gives you a little bit of idea of their cycle. Right? If they're not a public company, maybe you can get some intel from another account executive that you know that is a partner for them. So start with doing a little homework and then try to validate that homework in a conversation with them. So maybe not as direct of a conversation and like the first time you meet them, but maybe a little bit of, indirect questioning or validation of things that you might have gained from other public information.
Yeah, and I'm guessing you guys have pretty good spidey sense as to when you talk to rep and you can see if they've done their homework or not. That probably gains some brownie points with you. So, just curious from your perspective, when you work with an account team, what kind of concrete actions, qualities do they do that you find starts to actually build that trust with you? What are kind of examples of what you've seen and you respond to well?
Sure. And I'll go back to how you and I met when we were partners. And it was all about, you exhibited a great deal of patience and understanding. It was a very mature sort of approach, understanding that we were looking at a new RFP with you, some new solutions. You came in with a very patient understanding and, frankly, transparent approach to that. Those are really key. It's about trust. For me, I want to trust the partners that I have. I want to be able to walk away from a meeting and say, they told me the following three things. I believe those are true. I believe that I can trust them. And that makes me comfortable moving forward. I think the second part is really flexibility. It's very difficult for me to have a conversation where I get pressed of, well, this deal is only good for 1 month and then we have to move on. That sort of pressure just doesn't work for me. And I'll walk away from it, even if you have a better technology than somebody else, because I don't want to put up with it.
Yeah, it feels like a car deal, right? At that
Yeah.
point. Yeah, and I think to me, and I appreciate the compliment. I think to me, it's about understanding and empathy of where that person's sitting and meeting them where they're at before actually kind of going on with your own objectives. I think one of the cardinal sins that most salespeople have is they think about what they need from the conversation versus what the person that you're talking to needs from that conversation. So I think, that's my mentality at least in how is there anything else that you would add?
I think the time commitment part, a lot of times I'll meet new prospective partners maybe at a conference or at some sort of public meeting. And when the folks understand that, hey, I only have 5 minutes to chat, but maybe can give me the very succinct, value statement, the elevator pitch. Be ready for the elevator pitch at a right time. Be ready for an hour-long session that they may give you at a different time. Don't try to cram an hour into 5 minutes. Be respectful of the time of the person you're talking to, and be very flexible in how you engage them.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things that noted that you just mentioned, Scott, a few minutes ago was a referral from another CISO
Mm.
that you know and likely very well, put in high regards. So in the sales process, maybe your take about the level of impact that when an account manager provides you with a referral, case study, within you kind of take a blind call to somebody in your network and find out they work with them. What is the weight that carries for you in the sales process?
I think for me personally, it is incredibly valuable. If a fellow CISO of mine comes to me and says, "Hey, I have a really good experience working with this particular company," I will actually reach out and initiate that conversation. That happened. One of my customer CISOs told me they were using a particular security solution, and they said, "Hey, this really worked. It solved a problem for me. Maybe you ought to take a look at it." I did. I followed up within a matter of a couple of weeks, set up an initial discussion with that company. It's a lot better when I know that somebody else has successfully used a product or service, and I can expect similar outcomes from that. So referrals, whether they're informal that you've actually asked your customer to give you, or haven't or have, they're both incredibly valuable.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that sometimes companies miss is the concept of what happens post sale and the customer success.
Mm.
Because how you create that person that we call in our vendor world champions really has to do with what happens post sale. And are you keeping up with them and are you keeping them informed, et cetera? So, that's a plug for a future episode we'll do on kind of customer success programs and what good looks like. But just curious from your perspective, I'll just throw out kind of this that just made me think of another question to ask you, Scott. So here's the conundrum. When you're an early stage company, you don't have that many customers. So you don't have, like a laundry list of all these referrals. So what do you think if you could give advice to a founder who's listening who maybe is only into their third design partner and that's all they have, but they want to have a conversation with you? How should they give you that proof point given that they don't have a long set of fancy stories to tell you?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say the most successful founders that have engaged me have been people that I've known in my past. Perhaps a founder started a company, but for the past 5 years, worked for a different company that I might have used or talked to or met somehow. And so previous relationships that a founder has built are incredibly valuable moving forward. Maybe you're doing something entirely new in the business you're standing up, but you built relationships over time, and those relationships are really a great avenue and a door into building new relationships for whatever your new business is.
Yeah, and that's why I always look for in the founders as they're discussing their past is have you sat in that seat? Or if you haven't, who are you bringing on your team that has? Or does your VC have that, right? Have those relationships? Because to your point, it's just really hard at the beginning. Let's transition a bit into product messaging. I joke sometimes, Scott, that when I'm working with vendors in the same space, you can copy and paste their websites over and over again because the messaging, I mean, God bless you and what your inbox does look like. To me, it all looks the same. And at the same time, you don't want to be so unique that the customer is reading it going like, I don't know what this thing does.
Mhm.
So there's this balance you have to, do within product messaging and positioning. So I wanted to pick your brain on the topic of product messaging and positioning. So for you, not talking about a specific technology or a specific type of problem that you're solving, Scott, but just what type of messaging actually catches your eye. So imagine you're seeing that cold email come through, getting a cold call, because I'm sure I know you get a million of them, but what actually would catch your eye? What are the elements of a message that seem interesting to you?
The most effective messaging that I've seen in the past year or so has to do with tying the value proposition of the service or product with something recent in the news. It's been very effectively used where, oh, well, there's this major security incident that occurred 3 months ago. We have a solution that would have helped that company prevent it. That sort of tied to reality, a very pragmatic approach is more helpful to me because I live in the pragmatic world of I'm trying to manage risk. I'm not necessarily trying to solve world hunger with some idealistic solution that's going to solve things 20 years from now. So being able to tie your value proposition to something that is recent, current, and understood by your audience, I think is of the greatest value.
Okay. What else?
I do think that also being able to sort of tie that to, perhaps another customer or someone that knows you, willing to discuss their experience with what you're doing. So even if you're a startup, you may have gotten an initial customer who was able to solve some problem in a very cost-effective manner. See if you can get that customer to be a referral or make some sort of written statement where the company X used our product and benefited in such and such a way. To me, having a third party, particularly testify about the value that you create, is incredibly effective messaging. I think that's also helpful.
That's interesting because that's typically a testament. We would, you would typically put that in a sequence, but never thought about up leveling that at the top. So it seems like that would catch your eye if maybe the opening sentence was, "We work with so and so company, and here is some words that they said about their experience with us." That's interesting, especially probably if you recognize the name or the company. What from your perspective as you are getting these emails. So let me kind of flip the script a little bit and say, from a rep's perspective, we spend a ton of time. Sometimes you take two approaches. You'll draft cold emails and you want to personalize them. And so there's one type of rep that will do it. They'll say something that pretty much works for everybody at some refer to a generic news and say, "Hey, listen, based upon the recent breach at blah blah blah, here's where our observations." And generally you can copy paste that to everybody and it won't be specific. There's another approach where I could say that same experience and I could say, "Scott, based upon what Sabre Technologies does, this is how I could see this actually showing up in your business." Which, again, from a sales rep perspective, that takes 3, 4, 5 times as much time. But sometimes, to be honest with you, Scott, as somebody who's done a lot of prospecting, that doesn't have demonstrable returns. So for you, let's just kind of put it to bed here. Uber personalized emails for you, does that make you open it more?
Honestly, no. I think the sort of realization here is I get so many emails and they're cold call emails. As you can tell in a minute, and most of them are frankly not personalized.
Yeah.
Most of them are generically sent to everyone. I pretty much discount them. If I get like 3 at a time, I will just block that email address and I will never listen to you again. I just don't have time to deal with that. So I do think the personalized are more effective, but you have to choose where you're going. If someone tries to come in with a personalized email that's really applicable to some other industry, my company writes software. So I would be interested in a personalized email about a software solution or generative AI or something like that that's
Yeah.
really what my company's trying to do. But if you're trying to sell me a solution that's in a retail business or food industry or healthcare, you're wasting your time. So you
Yeah.
have to be careful where you're going to spend and understand the industry before you spend time on a personalized email.
Makes sense. Just a shameless plug to our prior episode that we did with Emily Shipman around ICP, ideal customer profile. If you only got
Mm.
so much time in the day, you got to really focus on the type of person, archetype, if you will, that you can actually solve their problem. So makes sense. So you mentioned value a few times. So that's why I fundamentally know that's probably why we got along in a business setting, is because you've listened to my past episodes. I'm a big fan of the value selling approach. There's all different types of sales approaches, but value in my mind is not speeds and feeds. Value is helping the customer understand your outcomes. The fundamental way that you discuss value is you have to be able to empathize with the customer. And I explain it in my sales trainings as just like in learning a new friend, you're going to learn about where they came from, the things they like, they don't like, what are their hobbies. You got to kind of get to know them. So I would imagine, Scott, that based upon knowing you, that the vendors that give a good impression really you get a sense that they intimately understand your business and your team and your challenges. Just from your perspective, give us a little bit of a hint of how that shows up for you. Like, how do you kind of pressure test how well that vendor actually truly understands what it's like to sit in your seat at your company and what your company is faced with?
I think it begins with understanding how well the business is doing. Because we work in the travel industry, the past 5 years have been particularly challenging. The whole pandemic was a major setback for everyone in the travel industry, and my company included. I think the most effective partners understand what our finances are, what our business objectives are. And maybe they read the 10K, or maybe they have done a little research and reading articles about my company before they come in. That's very helpful. It doesn't have to be over the top, but at least puts some context into the discussion. Secondly, they need to understand how we make money, and what our customers expect from us. My customers are airlines and travel agencies and hotels, who ultimately serve the individual. And so I think that sort of context is particularly
Mhm.
important. I'm not a B2C company, I'm a B2B company.
Right.
So what you sell me and how you sell it to me, show me something in value that it's going to make an airline help me sell them more. That would
Yeah.
be incredibly. And then finally, in today's world, particularly in cybersecurity, there's so much regulatory and compliance oversight. Is there a way that you can create value by making that compliance requirement that I have to fulfill easier to do? So it's not just about security, it's about compliance. There's lots of ways that you can create value for me and for, basically being a more profitable company.
Yeah, and look at every rep who's worked for me knows this. My bugaboo is that listen, if you haven't taken and look in today's age, you can cheat with ChatGPT, although you've got to verify your sources. If you haven't taken that 10, 15, in my mind, 30 minutes to actually look at the last earnings report, Google kind of what's in the news wire, look at the person you're talking to, see if there's
Mhm.
recent posts that they've had on LinkedIn. That's just what you do, right? That's what you need to do to be prepared so that you have context. I was talking to a chief risk officer and I
Mhm.
asked him, I was like, why do I know that, the way he talks, I know that he despises vendors. So the first conversation, I just asked a few questions. I
Mhm.
just wanted to make sure I understood how their business worked. And he was just so appreciative that I actually was trying to understand that. So I think, if you can spend that time up front, maybe you don't have the answers, but I bet you wouldn't mind, Scott, if I'd asked you a question. Hey, how do you work with this type of client? I would imagine it's a little bit like this, but I just wanted to check my assumption. I would imagine, that would actually get you some brownie points. Fair?
I think that's very true. And I think, all of us are human beings. When someone shows interest in what we're doing and what's important to us, that really just sort of makes a good connection. It's got to be real. People can tell if it's just a,
Yeah.
fake, hey, you're trying to get my attention versus something that's truly sincere and honest. And I think that's so important. And it's a skill that we all learn in how we interact with other people.
Yeah, kind of feel like we lost that a little bit during the pandemic. What are the things that they like? I like to look at the background, see if there's any interesting medals in the
Mhm.
background that I can ask about. But to your point, you got to be genuine about it. If you don't care about people, it doesn't work. All right, so let's keep moving down the sales process. And so, kind of mentally, we've talked about the topics that would get me a meeting with you, Scott, right? Cold. And then we talked about, let's just imagine I'm meeting with you now, I've gained the trust and credibility. So now we're in a sales process. You've looked at a demo of my product, and now we're kind of going through that, demo to getting on our words technical win to budgeting and to negotiation, et cetera. So overall, as we talk about this part of the active part of the sales process with you, what do you find personally the most frustrating or time consuming?
So if you get me to the point where I'm actually interested in the product or solution, I'm going to want to know how much it's going to cost. Because the first question I'm asking myself is, can I even afford this particular
Yeah.
solution this year, or do I have to wait for the future? It's so frustrating when I ask that question of, "Well, how do you sell this? How do you license it? How much is it gonna cost?" That it takes a month to get an answer back. That should be something that you have some sort of answer to at least be able to explain generalities and then say, "I'll get something back to you in a week on a budgetary estimate." That should be incredibly achievable. If your business is not ready to do that, then you probably need to do a little more homework before you start trying to win customers. The second part is getting a trustable quote. Again, We work with a lot of different partners. We understand sort of technologies, have some expectation. If I get something that's way too high or way too low that just doesn't seem right, I'm going to just lose. It's a credibility issue, and so I think you need to be transparent as possible. I understand that you, as a vendor provider, need to make money too, but don't try to pull the wool over my eyes because my team and I have a lot of experience between us and sort of working through these issues.
Yeah, and you've probably even seen competitive quotes. Yeah, and this gets to, Scott, to kind of speak from the other side about this and to kind of the perspective is the concept of pricing and packaging is one of the most important things that a company should get right at every stage. And so what could actually be happening is a plethora of root causes. If you can't easily give pricing, your pricing model could be super complex to where I've got to get 14 inputs in order for me to even figure out my calculator what price to give to you. Or to your point, I've set a list price that is set up to have like an 80% discount. And now I'm kind of
Mhm,
in some sort of, made up realm of pricing. Pricing and packaging is so important because it needs to consistently align with the value that you perceive that you're getting. So if my price is lower than your perceived value and outcome, that's a
mhm,
winner. But to your point, Scott, if you haven't actually spent enough time getting that information or your pricing and packaging is super freaking complex, where you look at the quote, and I know you've had this experience before and your eyes glaze over 'cause you're like, "There are 30 lines on this quote. I have no idea what this thing is meaning to me." That's even worse, right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of vendors out there that have that type of approach. So, pricing, packaging, I just can't say enough. I think sometimes we rely on the in the early stages on, like, let's just, we're gonna make it up for each customer, but at some point, you need to ground on an approach that's repeatable and easy for your sales reps to do what you just ask is to be able to quickly give you a rough order of magnitude and not put you through the ringer. What advice would you give a sales team, an inspiring a 26-year-old sales rep, Kathleen, back in a long time ago, I'm not going to disclose my age, that would make this sales process smoother and more aligned to your needs?
Again, I think it's about doing research in the business. If you get to the point where, your prospect is actually asking for pricing, hopefully by that time you understand what it is that they're trying to solve, maybe what other security partners or other IT partners that they use in their business. So hopefully you've got some basic research so that as you make a proposal to them, it's an informed proposal that you understand how what you're offering them fits in with their bigger picture. Hopefully, that has happened during some of the conversations that have gone on. Like I said before, it's about not only reading, just like if they're a public company, reading the 10K, but maybe you'll see some news releases from some of their other current IT partners. I do interviews. I've done videos with some of my major partners, and so if someone is trying to sell me a product, maybe they'll see that my biggest partner that I currently have is company X. That might help them figure out how they fit in versus that company. Are they competing against them? Are they complementary? All that's news. So read the news, talk to other customers, talk to other account teams that might be working in the same area. Your relationships are very important. Also, think about any big deals that maybe you have had or they have had. Just ways to find out more about how the value you're creating fits into their puzzle of creating their environment.
Yeah. I mean, just the ability to ask really good questions to uncover that, into your earlier point, in a most time efficient way. I always tell reps, like, you only really have like four real questions you can get in before you kind of start going down your path or whatever agenda. So make them count. So let's move on. So we got the sale. So I've captured you. We've done the deal. You're happy. You've bought my products. Let's talk about the post sale experience. Typically, to give credit where credit's due, it's not uncommon that maybe at this point you actually might switch to working with a different, customer success manager and not, your primary
Mhm.
point of contact's not going to be your account manager. So we'll just ask the question as it relates to the company and their account team. From your perspective, one of the hardest things to do with some types of products is actually to do what's called a value realization exercise to understand and get the metrics right as to, okay, here's what happened before, what's the after. How have you done that in the past that has been a successful approach, or how have you seen vendors
Mhm.
guide you? Because ultimately, in order to do that right, I, as a vendor, actually need to ask you and your team questions to set the baseline. And I need to kind of ask you and your team along the way how those baselines have changed. And let's just be honest, sometimes, especially those baselines are not just quantitative, they're a little bit qualitative. These are kind of hard to get because you
Mhm.
don't actually know. So, how has the kind of post sale value realization, how have you seen that to be successful?
I think one thing the most effective companies or partners do is they help their clients answer the questions. If I've just bought a new tool, I won't even know what questions to ask. So the companies that can come in and sort of have a customer success program that says, "Hey, we're 90 days in. Let us show you how you're using this product. Let us show you what it's doing." So hopefully you're in a business that's mature enough to sort of have that standard customer success program in place where you show that all your customers the same sort of metrics. What are they giving out of this solution that's helping them be more effective? Because I'm asking myself, did I get what I thought I was buying? Am I getting the value out of that? Were the professional services that I purchased with it, did they complete all the work that they were supposed to? Am I getting, appropriate engagements and follow-ups that are helping me to answer the question to my leadership, did my investment create value? That's ultimately what's going to help me decide, am I ever going to do a renewal?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll kind of put my own plug into that for what it's worth is for certain types of products, you might actually not see that true ROI for, let's say, year in. So I
Yeah.
think what's really critical is for the account team to help the customer understand those milestone wins. Just like as a founder, you're going to celebrate, "Yay, I've got my first customer," and you know that that's moving the needle. You've got to help the customer understand, "Hey, just so you know, we haven't made, Scott, we haven't gone to your big rock that you wanted, but here is these micro improvements I see from last 3 months to help keep you motivated. Like, yes, we are moving the needle." So I think that's one of the things, in my personal opinion, that vendors could do a better job of actually creating a milestone based plans, because I mean, even my own services in my business, I work with a vendor and 3 months in, I'm kind of like, I don't really know if I've seen the results, but, he came back to me and said, "Hey, but here's what we've done." And I could clearly see there's progress. I'm like, "Okay, I got to stay this, we were making strides. I'm giving this, I need to give this thing enough time to bake. So I'm backing off a little bit, but I'm still watching, but at least I'm getting me a sense that, this is moving forward." So is that fair?
I think it is. For me, I put that in the context of expectation management. Promises were made to me. I made an investment, and the post sales team needs to help me manage the expectations. I know it's not going to go perfect. Help me understand what is going well and what we need to improve on, and let's work together to make it successful.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, your top 3 action, your time is valuable before the sale, but also after the sale, Scott. So
Mhm.
for you, what are the top 3 things, activities that you feel like could be the most effective in maintaining the post-sale relationship with you?
For me, quarterly success meetings of some form or shape, whether it's the account team or a post sales team, are incredibly important. They don't have to be long. They can be a half hour, they can be an hour, but some sort of discussion to have that expectations. Did I get what I was expecting? That's number one.
Yep.
Secondly, make sure the customer knows how to get reports or metrics or key performance indicators. How do we know that the tool or product or solution is actually delivering what we purchased?
Yep.
And then finally, help the CISO or the CIO or your contact answer the questions for their business. If they're being asked, well, what is this doing for us? You should help them to say, well, these are the top 3 things that the product that I sold you has done for you in the last 90 days. Help them answer the question that their team members are going to give them.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are all great 3 things. So hopefully the listeners here are taking notes. General advice for cybersecurity companies. So, imagine, Scott, the most common scenario that I get a phone call of, "Kathleen, can you come and help our company?" is because everybody wants to sell to a Fortune 1000, right? That is obviously everybody's growth plan because you can't do it with small deals. Typically for a B2B business, that's what you want. But breaking into a Fortune 1000 past you've already exhausted your Rolodex is kind of hard. So if you were a seller, what advice would you give into a company that, again, they've really used all the Rolodex, Scott, they've gotten all the engagements they've gotten. So let's say they've been able to crack into a couple, but really get into more enterprise companies. What advice would you give to a tech company or a founder who is really trying to make that go to market shift from maybe mid market to enterprise, government to large enterprise?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it begins with understand your customer. Are they a first mover? Because if they're not a first mover, we're very unlikely to take the risk of joining with a unproven company. I personally am very conservative. I'm not a first mover. I want proven solutions because ultimately my job, my credibility depends on choosing the right solutions to protect my company. So I'm not likely to choose a whole lot of founders who don't have any other big businesses that they've been successful with.
Yeah.
So for me, it's start small and find some current customers that you have that will be champions to come and talk to me and prove to me that you have value. But there are CISOs or CIOs and tech companies that are first movers. They want to be innovative. So really you have to understand the target that you have, which way they move. And if you're a founder of a brand new company trying to target a very conservative tech company like myself, probably not going to have success.
Yeah, and this is why when I go to market, I spend time with the client and really push them on thinking about where is the product that they sell, where is that market as it relates to technology adoption
Mhm.
curve, right? If this is a proven market, then that's a different sales strategy than if you're educating, which has different costs associated and a different approach. If you're going to go hard on the demand gen, is it going to be more educational? Your blog posts are going to sound a lot different. And so I think that's one of the things to consider. So, man, I think this is a really exciting time to be in tech with so many
Mhm.
advancements happening with AI. But of course, you're worried about the bad guys are using AI too as well. But from here on out for the next 2 or 3 years, Scott, how do you personally see the role of a CISO evolving? I think it's
Mhm.
just, 15 years ago, CISO was just trying to get a seat at the table, but now that ain't what's happened right now. So just your take upon what we're going to see in the next 2 to 3 years.
CISOs, if we behave as business executives, we have a seat at the table. I talk to my CEO, I talk to my board, I talk to all of my leaders across the company every day about how we manage risk and how we can help create value in selling to our own customers. So it is very true. I actually did a presentation a year ago about how CISOs have transitioned from being technical experts to business executives, and it really helps create value for their company and their business. So that has changed entirely. I focus more of my time on my business's financial success. I help protect it from harm. I help win our customers. I'm right with my own sales teams out trying to convince our customers that we have a security program that they want to be a partner with. And I finally control costs. I know that I cannot control the top line as much as I can control the bottom. So I'm
Yeah.
all about cost controls.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right. We're going to do a segment I do with all my guests called rapid fire. And so I'm just going to ask you kind of randomly a few
Mhm.
questions, Scott, and you only have a few seconds to answer. Just come with like what's top of mind. Get to know Scott, rapid fire. All right. If you had a free Saturday afternoon, nothing to do, what is your favorite thing to do for fun?
I would be scuba diving without a doubt.
Risk taker. Said that at the beginning. Quite the risk taker. What's the best part of your job as a CISO?
I love to make decisions and I love to be accountable for something that's very important to my company.
I like that. I like that. I actually would have guessed that you would have said leadership because I know you spent a lot of time thinking about that.
Yeah,
But
that's
that's
too.
that's
But I think decision making is part of leadership for me.
that's fair. That's fair. All right. What is the first job you ever had?
Mhm. When I was a teenager, I was a grocery store carry out. Back in that day, we actually had people bag the groceries and carry them to the car for you. So that's what I did a long time ago.
Listen, I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, and I visited a few years ago, and they still do that. So shout out to Lubbock. So, anyways, but yes, I do miss those days. All right. If you could meet one person in the world, and just to qualify, they could be living or dead, who would
Hmm.
it be? And most importantly, why?
I'll go all the way back to Abraham Lincoln. And ultimately,
Hmm.
because I think as a leader, who's ever faced more adversity and triumphed through that?
That's an interesting one. All right. So to recap this episode here, for the listeners, there's been many nuggets of material in this episode, but just to recap, key points that I've noted in this episode is really we're stressing understand, do your research, understanding who you're talking to, just like you would a friend. Make sure you know who you're talking to and have that context. So do your research, be prepared, show your value, and make sure that you're demonstrating that in your conversations, and most importantly, the post sale. So, the true win to me of what you really pointed to, just to put it on those salespeople listening, is the renewal is what really demonstrates that you are in this to win it with your customer in the long term. Final thoughts and advice, Scott, for SaaS companies, particularly in cyber, that you'd want to share? Just any closing thoughts?
And we live in a high risk world today, particularly in the cybersecurity world. There will be continued investment in that, but investment is all about return of value. And so help your prospects, help your customers know what value proposition you offer.
Perfect. I love it. So, for those listeners, I hope you enjoyed the episode today. We love questions and feedback and even sharing your own experiences on this topic. For the next episode, we're actually going to talk about building a demand generation, lead generation program from scratch. And what does that take, especially with new technology? It's a really interesting and fun time to be imparting upon a project like that. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Go to Market Lab. I really hope today's discussion provided you with actionable insights that will help you master your go to market strategy and, most importantly, accelerate your SaaS business's growth. So, if you did like today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, share with your friends. All of your feedback gives us an understanding of what other content you want to listen to as I bring on other industry experts and founders in future episodes. So, also connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to chat with you that way. And that way, as I'm distributing information about upcoming episodes, you will be on the list to make sure that you are notified of that. So, together, through this podcast, I'm hoping we're building a community that will help us navigate these super complexities of this market, of go to market in general, and hopefully your company will get to your growth goals faster. Thank you guys again for listening, and see you on the next episode.